The first scream did not rise from behind the locked cockpit door. It tore through the aisle instead. Heavy boots pounded against the narrow floor as three armed men forced their way forward, shouting commands in a harsh language few passengers recognized but everyone understood. Rifles swung wildly, dark muzzles slicing across terrified faces like silent verdicts. A drink cart tipped and slammed against the seats. Glass shattered. A woman sobbed openly. Someone whispered a prayer that trembled more than their hands. Moments ago, the aircraft had felt calm, controlled. Now it felt like the air itself had been stolen, like there was no room left to breathe. Viktor Kovac halted at the center of the cabin and seized the nearest flight attendant by the arm. Mara Ellison did not struggle. He shoved her down between the rows, forcing her shoulder toward the floor until her knees struck the carpet. His voice remained steady, almost casual, as he explained this was the cost of forgetting one's place. A lesson, delivered publicly. Passengers froze, eyes wide. Some turned their heads, pretending not to see. They were ashamed and relieved. Relieved it wasn't them. Mara kept her gaze lowered. Her hands rested loosely on her thighs. She appeared small, unremarkable, already broken by fear. Only one man sensed something was wrong. Cole Barrett watched the way she settled her weight, the way her breathing slowed instead of spiraling, the way her balance remained flawless even as the plane shuddered lightly. Through a pocket of turbulence, fear saturated the cabin. Judgment pressed down like humidity. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from today. Mara Ellison was in her early 40s, the kind of woman people looked past rather than at. Her hair was pinned tight. Her Navy uniform was pressed to perfection. Her face held that practiced calm flight attendants mastered the kind that made strangers feel safe. Without demanding attention, she had flown this route so many times she could picture the cabin with her eyes closed. The loose seat belt over the toddler's lap in row 10. The man who always asked for 2 sugars. The nervous first-time flyer gripping the armrest like it was the only solid thing left in the world. In her life, comfort came from routine. Routine came from getting the small things right. To the passengers, she was service. A moving uniform. A polite voice that meant coffee, blankets, and rules about tray tables. Even now, as terror crept through the cabin like smoke, most of them still saw her as the safest kind of powerless. That was exactly why Viktor Kovac chose her. He didn't just want control of the aircraft. He wanted control of the story unfolding inside it. And humiliating a flight attendant was the fastest way. To teach 200 people to obey without resistance. Mara remained on her knees until he released her. When he finally moved on, she stood slowly, as if every ounce of strength had drained from her body. She began walking down the aisle with her head lowered, collecting spilled cups and straightening what she could. It gave her hands a task. It gave her a reason to move. More importantly, it gave her angles, distances, faces and time. Senator Paul Whitmore sat near the front in a wide seat, his shoulders rigid with outrage he couldn't act on. He looked at Mara the way powerful men sometimes looked at staff when things went wrong, as if she were part of the problem. As if she were responsible for fixing it simply because she wore a uniform. When she paused beside his row to comfort a trembling woman, Whitmore leaned in and spoke just loud enough for her to hear. He told her she needed to do something useful, that the crew had a responsibility, that someone should talk to the men and resolve this. The words sounded brave. They were coded in contempt. Mara didn't argue. She didn't flinch. She gave him a small nod, the same one she'd used on angry travelers and exhausted parents for years, and moved on. Behind her, Linda Moore watched carefully. Linda was the senior attendant, mid-50s, sharp eyes, the kind of woman who could read a cabin like a weather system. Years of training new hires had taught her that panic always left traces, even in people trying to hide it. Mara was leaving none. The hijackers paced the aisle, confiscating phones, checking overhead bins, barking orders that reduced grown men to silence. The cabin lights felt too bright, reflecting off damp foreheads and tear-filled eyes. The steady hum of the engines sounded louder now, as if the plane itself were listening. Mara moved through it all with deliberate steps. Her shoulders stayed level. Her breathing stayed controlled. Her hands remained visible and empty. But her eyes didn't drift the way frightened eyes usually did. They tracked. Cole Barrett hadn't wanted an aisle seat, but it was the last one available. Now it gave him a clear view of everything that mattered. His body slipped into an old pattern of awareness. 18 years in the Air Force didn't fade politely. It lived on in habits that never died, watching hands, measuring distance, listening for shifts in tone. He saw how Mara observed Victor without staring, how she counted the men without moving her lips, how her gaze flicked to the cockpit door, then the emergency phone, then the nearest bulkhead mapping the space in her mind. Others stared at the weapons. Mara watched the timing. When the aircraft jolted through rough air, passengers gasped. A woman clutched her husband's wrist. A child whimpered. Mara adjusted her footing before the turbulence fully hit. It was subtle, a shift of balance that required no support. Cole had seen that reflex before on flight lines, in high winds, among pilots stepping down ladders without breaking stride. Linda saw it too. Their eyes met for half a second. What Linda saw there wasn't fear. It was calculation. Mara knelt beside an older man struggling to breathe quietly, his chest rising shallow and fast. Her voice softened as she guided him through slow breaths, fingers finding his pulse with precise confidence. She read it like an instrument, then scanned the cabin again before anyone could thank her. It wasn't coldness, it was discipline. Cole felt something tighten in his gut, a familiarity he couldn't name. People whispered prayers. Others clung to each other, crying softly. Mara moved as if fear were a condition to manage, not a crisis to collapse under. She didn't look heroic. She looked forgettable. As she reached the galley curtain, Victor's eyes followed her a moment too long. He didn't smile. He didn't have to. Mara returned with water bottles, passing them down the aisle with steady hands. Each stop gave her something new. Victor favoring his right side, one man constantly adjusting his grip, another scanning exits like a technician memorizing machinery. Then something flickered so fast it almost didn't exist. Her eyes lifted briefly toward the overhead speaker, not in fear, but in the way someone listened for a radio channel. Her jaw tightened once, as if responding to a voice only she could hear. Cole's throat went dry. He knew that look. He'd seen it in pilots receiving orders mid-flight. Silent readiness. Checklists completing inside the mind. Linda stepped closer in the galley, voice low. Asked if Mara was okay. Mara nodded, calm. She told Linda to keep passengers settled, and the aisle clear, spoken like routine safety protocol. Not a cabin under siege. Linda almost asked why Mara sounded so sure. Then Victor turned his head slightly, listening. Mara lowered her gaze again, shrinking back into expectation. She became background, the tired flight attendant, the woman meant to be overlooked, but Cole saw the truth. She wasn't waiting for courage, she was waiting for timing. The takeover became complete when the cockpit door stayed silent and the captain's voice never returned. The plane continued forward, indifferent, while the cabin transformed into a controlled cage. The hijackers no longer needed constant shouting. Fear had taken over that job. Victor Kovac walked the aisle like he owned the sky. Tomas Vargas followed, memorizing faces and hands. Eli Novak moved like contained violence, snapping at cries, kicking bags just to remind everyone how powerless they were. A rhythm settled, in quiet, then a sharp command, stillness, then a calm threat that promised action. Hope vanished first. Phones came next. Vargas moved with a plastic bag. Ordering devices surrendered. Hesitation earned Novak's weapon, angled close enough for meaning to sink in. Screens vanished one by one, taking with them the illusion that anyone outside the cabin could still see what was happening. A teenage boy tried to hide his phone beneath his thigh, muscles locked, breath held like it might make him invisible. Novak caught the movement instantly. He ripped the device free and smashed it against the armrest again and again until the screen shattered and went dark. The crack of glass rang through the cabin like a gunshot that didn't need a bullet. It was a warning without mercy. Mara Ellison continued down the aisle with water bottles balanced in both hands. Her face remained calm, her voice low and steady. She spoke to shaking passengers the way a nurse spoke during a crisis, reminding them to breathe slowly, to keep their hands where they could be seen, to lean back and stay quiet. She gave fear a task, something small and manageable. And somehow it worked even if no one understood why. Linda Moore followed a few rows behind, using the service card as a thin shield whenever possible. Her hands trembled now and then, but her chin stayed lifted. She had lived through turbulence, medical scares, panic attacks, even death at altitude. This was different. This was intentional. And Mara's calm beside it felt almost unnatural. That kind of calm was dangerous. Victor noticed. He made sure she knew he noticed without ever speaking her name. Every time Mara paused to offer water, his gaze followed her like a rifle scope. Every time she crouched beside a passenger, he studied the placement of her feet. The cabin stayed quiet, but the scrutiny was deafening. Cole Barrett sat stiffly in his seat, shoulders drawn tight, eyes tracking the three men and Mara's movement between them. He hated being a witness, hated the helplessness most of all, because he knew what helplessness turned into when panic crossed a line. Whispers started anyway. They always did. Someone with a brave voice and no plan began stitching courage together from strangers, mistaking intent for strategy. Mara heard it before it reached her row. She didn't look toward the murmurs, but her eyes shifted, sensing the ripple of movement. She could feel a storm building, and storms inside confined spaces killed more people than they saved. Victor announced a destination no one believed. He demanded negotiations, a broadcast, recognition. It sounded political, but the message underneath was clear. Time belonged to him now. Minutes stretched. The engine's hum stayed steady. The air felt thin and recycled, heavy with sweat and fear. Silence pressed against people's chests until breathing itself felt loud. Then Victor changed the rules. He stepped into the center of the aisle and pointed toward a woman sitting with her, hands folded protectively over her swollen belly. Emily Carter, pregnant, eyes red from silent crying. A small boy sat beside her, face buried in her sleeve, trying to disappear. Owen Carter didn't understand hijackers. He understood only that his mother was afraid, and he wanted to fix it by being small. Victor told Novak to bring her. Emily shook her head immediately, pleading without words. Her husband wasn't on this flight. She had no shield except strangers barely holding themselves together. Novak yanked her up by the arm, hard enough to make her stumble. Owen cried out and clung to her hand. Novak shoved the boy back into the seat with careless force, his head striking the headrest. The cabin reacted as one body, a sharp inhale. Shared pain. Mara moved before anyone else. She stepped into the aisle, palms open, voice soft, almost apologetic. She told Novak to take her instead. She said the woman was pregnant, the boy terrified, and promised she would cooperate fully if he let them stay seated. Novak laughed, called her brave like it was an insult, tightened his grip on Emily just to prove he could. Mara didn't retreat. She stayed close enough that Novak had to look at her, close enough that swinging his weapon freely would risk hitting someone else. She shifted her body, slightly nervous, clumsy, as if she might trip on the seat leg. Her elbow brushed Novak's wrist at the exact moment the aircraft gave a small, natural bump. To anyone watching, it looked like an accident, a frightened attendant losing balance under pressure. For half a second, Novak's grip loosened. That was enough. Mara guided Emily back into her seat with one hand. With the other, she redirected Novak's arm downward, using leverage so small it was almost invisible. No struggle, no drama, just a quiet correction of force and balance. Emily collapsed into the seat, gasping, pulling Owen into her chest. Mara stepped back instantly, hands raised, eyes lowered, invisible again. Novak's smile vanished. He didn't understand what had happened, only that control had slipped, and that made him furious. Victor understood. His gaze sharpened as he approached, slow and deliberate. He looked at Mara the way a predator looked at prey that had just surprised it. His voice stayed low, but every passenger heard him. He told her that if she tried that again, he would hurt the pregnant woman first, not as a threat. As a rule. Mara nodded once, submissive on the surface. Inside, something locked into place. Not fear, not anger, but cold clarity. The cabin was balanced on a blade now. Cole's stomach turned. He had seen trained movement before. He had seen control like that. And he knew Victor had seen it too. Would you have stayed quiet, watching a pregnant woman dragged into the aisle? Or would you have stood up, knowing exactly what it might cost? The cabin tried to return to stillness, but it couldn't. Emily's shaking made fear contagious. Owen's whimpering made it worse. Nothing cut through the human heart like a child in pain. Whispers grew again, urgent, desperate. A man in a gray hoodie near the back began talking under his breath, gesturing toward the nearest hijacker, the galley curtain. The way Novak kept wandering too far from Victor. It was courage without training, hope without math. Mara noticed him. One glance took in his hands, his posture, the way his eyes measured distance. She saw the story forming in his head. Rush them, grab the gun, be the hero. Her throat tightened. She knew how that story usually ended. A cabin wasn't a battlefield. The space was too tight, the angles unforgiving, and the enemy had already decided how far they were willing to go. The man stood anyway. Two others rose with him. Sudden motion, a burst of hope that made the cabin lean forward as one. For a heartbeat, just one raw heartbeat. It looked like numbers might matter. Someone whispered, Do it, like a prayer. Then Victor lifted his weapon and fired into the ceiling. One sharp crack. Deafening, final screams exploded. People ducked. Owen buried his face into Emily's chest. The men froze mid-rush, suddenly remembering they were flesh, not legends. Novak slammed one attacker into a seat, driving his forearm into the man's throat. Varga moved with brutal efficiency, twisting an arm behind a back, pinning someone down like muscle memory. Victor spoke over the chaos, voice calm and terrifying. He said this was their only warning. The next attempt would end with someone dying in front of their family. He didn't raise his voice. Fear did the work. Mara stood motionless in the aisle, hands visible, eyes down. She looked as helpless as everyone else, but her mind was racing. She measured Victor's reaction time, studied Varga's positioning, noted Novak's aggression, the reckless edges of it. She was mapping the problem the way pilots mapped weather. Would you have rushed forward with them? Or would you have waited, knowing waiting might save more lives than courage ever could? The cabin quieted again, but it was different now. Not hopeful. This was the quiet of surrender, learned helplessness. Heavy in the lungs. A man sobbed openly. A woman prayed until her lips went numb. Senator Whitmore sat pale and silent, his earlier contempt reduced to something fragile and human. Mara moved toward the back, collecting fallen bottles, offering calm where she could without drawing attention. She knelt beside the man Novak had hurt, handing him a tissue, murmuring quiet reassurance. In a cabin stripped of dignity, she gave what little she could back. Mara leaned in toward Linda Moore for just a moment, her lips close enough that her words barely rose above the constant hum of the engines. She told Linda to keep everyone seated, to keep them breathing, to shut down any more attempts at heroics before fear turned them into corpses. She didn't explain herself. She didn't need to. There was something unmovable in her tone that made Linda nod and obey without question. When Mara straightened and turned back toward the aisle, Victor's gaze caught hers again. This time, his eyes carried a question. Not who are you? Not yet. It was sharper than that. What are you hiding? Mara dropped her eyes and folded back into invisibility because she knew the truth. There was no clean way out at this altitude. No rescue bursting through cloud cover. No cavalry racing the clock. There was only the cabin, the rhythm of terror settling into place, and the pressure of a moment that would eventually have to break one way or another. And Victor was watching her now with the attention of a man who could smell discipline beneath a uniform never meant to conceal it. The aircraft dipped slightly, not enough to worry an experienced traveler, just enough to slide drinks and tighten stomachs. Several passengers gasped anyway, hands flying to armrests, eyes darting upward as if the ceiling might explain what was happening. Mara Ellison adjusted her stance before the motion fully finished. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't grab a seat back. She didn't brace against a wall. Her feet widened by a fraction, knees softened, weight centered. The movement belonged to someone who understood how machines behaved in the air. Cole Barrett felt recognition bloom low and slow in his chest. He'd seen that adjustment 1,000 times on flight lines, in briefing rooms, in cockpits before takeoff. Pilots didn't react after movement. They moved with it. Bodies tuned to pitch and yaw the way sailors read waves. Civilians stumbled when the plane shifted. Pilots flowed. Mara flowed. She kept walking, water bottle steady, her head never snapping toward the windows. Instead, her eyes flicked briefly to the overhead panel, not seeking comfort, but listening. Like the aircraft itself was speaking. Another correction rippled through the fuselage. Sharper this time. Overhead bins rattled. Someone cursed under their breath. Mara's hand rose instinctively, palm open, signaling calm to the row she was passing. Her voice stayed even as she told them it was just light turbulence and to keep their belts fastened. The words were ordinary. The timing was not. Cole watched her mouth, a silent count under her breath. 1, 2, 3. The same rhythm pilots used when riding instability, waiting for the aircraft to settle back into its envelope. Dr. Nathan Brooks noticed too, though he couldn't have named it right away. He was trained to recognize decisiveness under pressure, to tell the difference between calm born of denial and calm born of competence. As a trauma surgeon, he lived in moments where hesitation killed faster than blood loss. When the man Novak had slammed earlier began to wheeze, Brooks knelt to assess him. Mara was already there. She didn't hover. She didn't ask permission. She checked airway, posture, responsiveness with quick, efficient movements. Then she told Brooks exactly what she needed. Seat back up, chin lifted, slow breaths, her voice low, firm, without uncertainty. Brooks followed her lead automatically, Only afterward did he realize what had happened. She hadn't deferred. She had directed like someone accustomed to being obeyed in emergencies. Linda stood nearby, pretending to adjust the galley curtain. She watched Mara's hands move with purpose. No wasted motion, no tremor. Linda had trained hundreds of attendants. She knew panic in all its disguises. This wasn't one of them. When Victor ordered a check-in with the cockpit, Mara was sent forward to relay the demand. She stopped just outside the reinforced door and lifted the emergency handset. Her posture shifted, shoulders squared, spine aligned, as if she'd stepped into a different room entirely. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm and clipped. No apologies, no softening language. She identified the situation, relayed the instruction, and asked for confirmation, using phrasing Linda had never heard from civilian crew. Say, again standby. A chill crept up Linda's arms. Flight. Attendants were trained to de-escalate to rap authority and courtesy. Mara spoke with clarity, not comfort. When the response crackled back, she listened without interrupting. She nodded once, replaced the handset, and turned. Victor was watching, his head tilted slightly, eyes narrowed, not angry, but evaluating. He'd been around disciplined people before. He recognized the sound of it, the way emotion stripped away under pressure. He stepped closer, invading her space. Testing for reaction. Mara lowered her gaze again, let her shoulders slope, let the illusion settle back into place. But Victor didn't retreat. Cole felt the tension shift. The hijackers had expected pleading, chaos, fear. What they hadn't expected was quiet competence moving through their cage without permission. Another change in pitch rolled through the cabin, stronger now. People cried out. Someone shouted toward the front, demanding answers no one could give. Mara's hand rose again. Steady. Her eyes tracked the motion before it finished. She braced, adjusted, then relaxed like someone who trusted the aircraft to do what it was built to do. Cole swallowed hard. He remembered pilots talking about trusting the machine, knowing when to intervene and when to let physics work. Mara carried that trust in her bones. Dr. Brooks leaned toward Cole and whispered without moving his lips, asking if Cole was seeing what he was seeing. Cole nodded once. Linda caught a fragment as Mara passed through the galley. Mara murmured something about timing and altitude under her breath. Not meant for anyone else. It wasn't fear. It was analysis. Linda's pulse spiked. Victor's certainty hardened into something darker. He began testing Mara, deliberately crowding her space, issuing sharp orders, making sudden movements designed to provoke. Mara absorbed it all. Let herself look small. Let herself look forgettable. But she didn't look lost. By now, the passengers and the audience could feel it. The pieces were there, scattered but intentional. The way she stood, the way she spoke, the way fear bent around her instead of through her. Who was she really? A veteran, a pilot? Something else entirely? The mystery tightened with every passing minute. The cabin wasn't just afraid anymore. It was uneasy. Victor felt it too. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her past. But he knew this much with cold clarity. The woman in the flight attendant uniform was trained, and training under pressure was far more dangerous than fear. The galley smelled of spilled coffee and recycled air, tight space where sound traveled too far. The curtain swayed gently with the aircraft's movement, shielding the narrow corridor from 200 terrified eyes. Without warning, Novak grabbed Mara's arm and yanked her back. She let herself stumble. Her shoulder clipped the cart. Her foot caught the floor track. She went with it, gasping softly every inch. The woman Novak wanted her to be. Weak. He shoved her through the curtain and pinned her against the counter, breath hot with adrenaline and cruelty. He told her she was getting brave, told her brave people got hurt first. Mara kept her eyes down. Hands rose slowly, palms open, compliant. Her breathing sped just enough to sell fear without letting it take control. She waited. The aircraft rolled slightly, a small correction most passengers never noticed. The cartwheels rattled. Novak shifted his weight to keep balance, leaning in, crowding her space. That was the opening. Mara moved in one clean, silent sequence. Her hand snapped up, not to strike, but to redirect. She caught Novak's wrist and elbow. Together, Mara twisted Novak's wrist and elbow across his own center line, stepping cleanly into the space he surrendered without ever realizing it. His weapon hand was pinned hard against the counter, his shoulder locked. His balance disappeared in an instant. She didn't slam him. She didn't throw him. She dismantled him. Novak let out a sound, surprise trying to become anger, but it never completed the transition. Mara drove her forearm into the nerve cluster beneath his jaw with precise, controlled pressure. Just enough. No wasted force. The lights went out without a shout. He sagged. Mara eased him to the floor, guiding his head so it didn't strike metal. His body went limp, breath shallow but steady, alive, neutralized. She didn't look at him again. She was already moving for the galley door when Tomas Varga stepped through the curtain, weapon raised. He took a Novak on the floor and understood everything in a single heartbeat. Varga didn't yell. He didn't rush. He adapted. Mara saw it immediately, the shift from intimidation to engagement. This one was disciplined, careful, dangerous in a quieter way. She raised her hands and backed up, letting him believe he still owned the moment. Her eyes flicked once, mapping the narrow space. The cart blocking one angle, the wall sealing another. Distance, timing. Varga advanced, muzzle steady, finger resting light on the trigger. Not panicked, ready. Mara waited until he stepped fully inside. The aircraft jolted again. She dropped low with the motion, using the turbulence to hide her movement. Varga fired instinctively. The round tore into the galley wall where her head had been a fraction of a second earlier. The gunshot exploded in the confined space, deafening. Mara surged forward beneath the weapon, slamming her shoulder into his chest and driving him back into the bulkhead. She trapped the rifle between their bodies, twisting it offline as her knee drove up into his thigh. Collapsing his stance, Varga grunted, fighting to recover. But she stayed inside his reach where his weapon was useless and his size worked against him. She hooked his leg, pivoted, and sent him crashing into the cart with a metallic bang that vanished beneath the roar of the engines. She ended it fast, a sharp strike to the side of the neck. A controlled choke just long enough. Varga sagged to the floor beside Novak, breathing, alive. Done. Mara stood still for half a second, listening. Footsteps. Viktor Kovac pushed through the curtain, firearm already raised. He took in the scene without shock. 2 men down, the flight attendant standing alone. But she wasn't slumped now. She wasn't small. Her posture was upright, centered, her eyes steady and unafraid. Viktor smiled slowly. He told her she should have run when she had the chance. Mara didn't answer. Her mind was already calculating the emergency kit mounted behind him, the angle of his stance, the confidence in the way his finger rode the trigger. She knew she couldn't close the distance before he fired. So she changed the equation. Her hand dropped toward the counter, fingers brushing the medical pouch she'd quietly unzipped earlier while passing through the galley. Viktor tracked the movement instantly and fired. The shot went wide as Mara twisted sideways, the round slamming into the metal frame inches from her head. She rolled behind the cart and came up with the injector already primed. Viktor fired again. The round grazed her arm. Pain flared sharp and hot. Mara didn't slow. She drove forward through smoke and noise, crashing into him with everything she had. The injector plunged into his thigh. Fast-acting sedative. Measured dose. Viktor snarled and struck her across the face with the butt of his weapon. Stars burst across her vision, but she stayed upright, staying inside his reach, counting silently. 1. 2. Viktor staggered. His movements slowed. Strength drained from him in real time. He tried to lift the gun again. His arm wouldn't obey. 3. He dropped to one knee, confusion flashing as his body betrayed him. Mara caught him as he fell, lowering him to the floor with the same care she had shown Novak. She kicked the weapon away and stepped back, chest heaving, blood trickling from the cut along her arm. The galley went still. No speeches, no victory, no relief. Mara checked all 3 men quickly, securing restraints with practiced efficiency. Then she turned and pushed through the curtain without looking back. The cabin froze when she emerged. Passengers stared as if she had stepped out of a different story than the one they were trapped in. Smoke lingered faintly. The hum of the engines filled the space where the hijackers' voices had been. Mara didn't meet their eyes. She moved straight toward the front of the aircraft, stride purposeful now, no longer hiding the way she carried herself. Linda Moore caught a glimpse of her face as she passed and felt something settle into place. This wasn't panic. This was command. Mara reached the cockpit door and pounded once. Sharp and deliberate, she identified herself, voice clear and controlled, cutting through the chaos without effort. When the door opened, she stepped inside without hesitation. Neutralizing the threat had never been the end. Flying the plane home was. The cockpit smelled of sweat, metal, and fear. First Officer Daniel Price was strapped into his seat, wrists bound tight. His eyes snapped up when the door opened. He looked past Mara first, expecting a hijacker, then froze when he realized It was the flight attendant standing there alone. Mara crossed the cockpit in 3 quick steps and cut his restraints. With a blade already in her hand, Price sucked in a breath like he'd been holding it for hours. Captain Robert Hayes lay slumped forward, unconscious but breathing. Blood darkened his temple. Alarms blinked softly across the panel and attended, but stable. Mara checked the captain with one efficient motion, pulse present. Then she turned to Price. "Get me clearance," she said. Already sliding into the left seat, she didn't ask. Her hands found the controls with instinctive certainty. Trim adjusted. Instruments scanned. The aircraft stabilized under her touch like it recognized her. The yoke felt familiar, grounding. Price stared for half a second too long. Then training took over. He reached for the radio, hands still shaking, and opened the channel. Before he could speak, Mara leaned in and took the mic herself. Her voice changed, not louder, sharper, cleaner. "Center, this is civilian flight 279. Hostile takeover contained. Request immediate priority handling and vectors to the nearest suitable field." A pause. The kind that meant reality was being rewritten on the other end. Mara waited, eyes moving across altitude, airspeed, fuel. She adjusted heading slightly, smoothing the aircraft's response. "Confirm hostile status." The controller replied, cautious now. Mara didn't hesitate. 3 hostiles neutralized. Captain incapacitated. "I am assuming control." Price turned fully in his seat. Disbelief etched across his face. The response came faster this time, edged with urgency. Coordinates followed. Emergency services mobilized. Fighter escort mentioned without ceremony. Mara acknowledged each instruction crisply. No wasted syllables. No fear leaking through. Finally, Price found his voice. He asked when she last flew. Mara did not turn to look at him. Not immediately. "Long enough ago," she said at last. Her voice carried no nostalgia, no regret, just fact. Her hands guided the aircraft into a controlled, shallow descent, movement smooth, precise, almost intimate. The plane responded as if it recognized her touch, as if muscle memory flowed both ways. In the cabin, no one spoke. Passengers sat rigid in their seats, listening to the same voice they had heard only minutes earlier while she knelt in the aisle, passing water bottles, absorbing insults, shrinking herself to survive. Now that voice filled the aircraft calm, authoritative, and the world shifted. There was no cheering, no applause, just silence. The kind born when disbelief overtakes fear, when awe steals the breath before sound can form. In that silence, the truth settled heavily and completely. The woman they had dismissed had taken control of the sky. The landing came firm but disciplined. The wheels struck the runway with a solid, grounding impact enough to be felt, steady enough to be trusted. Reversers roared. Brakes held. The long scream of terror that had lived inside the cabin for hours finally found release, leaking out as sobs, gasps, trembling breaths, and stunned quiet. When the aircraft slowed to a stop, no one moved at first. Then her voice came again over the speaker, measured, clear, guiding them through the final minutes the way a steady hand guides someone through darkness. Outside, emergency crews waited. Fire trucks lined the runway. Red and blue lights washed across the windows in pulsing color. One by one, the doors opened. Passengers filed out slowly, legs weak, faces drained of color, clutching children and strangers alike. Some wept openly. Some stared straight ahead, eyes hollow with shock. Others kept glancing back over their shoulders, half expecting the nightmare to follow them down the stairs. Emily Carter stepped onto the tarmac, with her son pressed tightly against her chest. Owen's small hands clutched her jacket. Her own hands shook, but she was upright. She paused at the base of the stairs and turned back toward the aircraft, tears spilling freely now, gratitude too large for words. Dr. Brooks followed, rubbing his hands along his jacket as though finally letting the tension drain from his body. Linda Moore came next, face drawn but resolute, scanning the scene like someone counting survivors rather than passengers. Inside the aircraft, Mara Ellison remained where she was. She completed the final checks with First Officer Price, secured the cockpit, and confirmed authority handoff. Only when everything else was finished did she rise from the captain's seat. Her arm burned where the round had grazed her. Her jaw throbbed where Victor had struck her. She ignored both. She stepped into the aisle and walked toward the exit, pace unhurried, shoulders squared. The cabin was empty now, stripped of fear, and voices, leaving only the low hum of a machine finally at rest. Mara descended the stairs last. The tarmac air was cold and sharp, heavy with jet fuel and rain. Cameras clicked behind barricades. Emergency personnel moved with purpose. but the center of the scene had gone still. A single figure waited at the foot of the stairs. Lieutenant General Richard Hale stood there in a crisp, unadorned uniform, posture rigid, expression unreadable. He did not look at the cameras. He did not look at the officers beside him. He looked only at Mara. For one suspended heartbeat, time seemed to hold its breath. Then General Hale stepped forward and raised his hand in a sharp, unmistakable salute, clean, precise, unmistakably public. Mara stopped. She had not expected this. Not here, not like this. Yet she returned the salute without hesitation, muscle memory rising before thought could interfere. Her hand came up steady, her posture locking into something the uniform she wore was never meant to carry. Cameras flashed like distant thunder. No words were spoken. None were required. Behind the barricades, the passengers felt the meaning land all at once. The fragments they had ignored snapped together with sudden clarity. The kneeling flight attendant, the quiet composure, the voice over the radio, the way fear had bent around her instead of breaking her. Senator Whitmore stood among them, earlier arrogance reduced to silence. His mouth hung slightly open as understanding arrived too late. He had mistaken power for importance. Emily Carter moved forward through the crowd, Owen still in her arms. She did not rush. She waited until the salutes were complete, then met Mara's eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking, and embraced her without asking. Mara stood still for a moment, then returned the hug gently, carefully, as though holding something fragile. Owen looked up at her with wide eyes and whispered that she flew the plane like in the movies. Mara smiled faintly and shook her head. She told him pilots didn't fly for movies, they flew for people around them. Faces softened. Some nodded. Some cried again, this time from relief rather than fear. A quiet understanding passed through the group, unspoken but shared. They had not been saved by luck. They had been saved by discipline. General Hale lowered his hand and stepped back, giving Mara space. His expression held respect and recognition, like a man acknowledging a truth long known within the profession. Mara adjusted the sleeve of her uniform, suddenly aware of how small it looked compared to what had just occurred. She did not seek cameras. She did not lift her chin. She simply stood there, a woman who had done her job when it mattered most. On a rain-slick runway beneath a gray sky, the cabin's fear finally released its grip. The passengers understood who she had been all along, and they would never forget it later. Emily Carter found Mara near the edge of the tarmac, away from cameras and officials. Her hands still trembled, but her steps were steady now. Owen leaned against her side like an anchor. She stopped a few feet away, studying Mara as if needing proof she was real. Then she spoke, the words breaking apart as they left her mouth. She thanked her. She said she hadn't known how. She said there had been a moment on the plane when she was certain she would never see her son grow up, and Mara had stood between that fear and reality without hesitation. Mara listened without interrupting. When Emily finished, she nodded once, not accepting praise, but acknowledging fact. She said she was glad they were safe. Nothing more. Owen tugged at her sleeve and declared with absolute certainty that she was a hero. The word landed softly, heavily. Mara crouched to his level, smiled gently, and shook her head. Heroes wore capes in stories, she said. She had just done her job at the right time. She told him the bravest thing he could do was take care of his mom and grow up kind. Owen considered this, then nodded as if it made perfect sense. Nearby, Senator Whitmore waited, hands clasped, authority softened into humility. When Mara turned, he apologized simply, no speeches, no excuses, just an admission of being wrong. Mara accepted it without comment. When a reporter finally asked why someone with her background worked as a flight attendant, why she chose a life so quiet, Mara answered without drama. She said she had spent years making decisions measured in lives and wreckage. When she left that world, she wanted to keep flying without adding harm to it. She didn't speak of war. She didn't speak of fear. She said she wanted peace to be her default. The reflection settled gently, like an after-action report written for the soul. Courage, it explained, was not volume. It wasn't shouted into chaos. It was discipline held under pressure. Training remembered when panic tried to take control. Humility strong enough to step forward without needing recognition. Mara Ellison hadn't saved lives by being louder than fear. She had saved them by being steadier. And as she walked away from the runway toward anonymity without regret, the meaning stayed behind. Courage is not loud. It is steady when everything else collapses. Stories like hers remind us that some of the strongest people in the world do not wear their service on the outside. They stand in grocery lines, work ordinary jobs, and move unnoticed through our lives, carrying years of discipline and sacrifice quietly on their shoulders. Many veterans never speak of what they did or what they lost. They choose calm lives not because they lack courage, but because they have already given so much of it. When crisis arrives, that quiet strength rises steady, unshaken, doing exactly what it was trained to do. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These stories keep courage alive for generations to come.